In episode 41 of the Ohio Lodge of Research's OLR Connections, two Masonic friends sit down and discuss many topics, including education, how they became into Masonry, and the influences in their life. Join past master of the Ohio Lodge of Research, Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopenski, and Worshipful Brother Brad Phelps, the Grand Lodge Education Officer of the Grand Lodge of Minnesota, as they discuss the good stuff.
As I get older, I find that I I don't collect stuff as much as I really just like collecting stories, and I like collecting those moments, those connections. Like that's what I look forward to. That's what I want when I travel and when I do things.
I I love the stories too. And I hate to think about some of these things disappearing and the stories being lost. It's super fun when you can get sort of a pedigree. Uh, but even when you don't, it's fun to imagine some of the things these items have seen. And I've been known to like pick up a vintage junk drawer too and pick through it and find the Masonic stuff. And I have plenty of that. I've been in the craft for a while now. But I love to see people's faces light up when it mysteriously like lands on their desk, or you find a connection. Maybe a brother grew up in North Dakota and he's looking for memorabilia from North Dakota, and you stumble across that. It's just super fun to reunite those items with people that will appreciate them and carry on their story.
What was it that drew you to Mason? Like, why did you end up joining?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, I was very close to my grandfather. Uh, Absolutely one of my heroes. If I was given the option to go back in time and meet anybody, uh, he's probably my number one pick. And, obviously I met him and I have wonderful memories, but I lost him in 2000, and I appreciated him when he was here, but there's a myriad of things I'd like to talk with him about. So at his funeral, I was extremely distraught. And there were these group of guys that came in with a square and compass bouquet. And one of the guys came up to me and asked me if I was a traveler. And I said, well, yeah, of course. I just got back on business from Australia. And he smiled and kind of nodded. And I found out later that my great uncle, his brother in law, was a past master in Winona. So there were these pieces that were stacking up. And I started to do a little bit of research. And really, these are two guys that were sort of soft spoken, but extremely well known. When they spoke, people paid attention, and they were who they were on their sleeves, and really looked out after the people that were around him. And I said, I want to be like that. Uh, and it's a little bit cliche to mention National Treasure, but I'm gonna do it because it was the straw. So it wasn't the treasure seeking or the sensationalism of the movie. It was that scene at the very end when Nick Cage was looking at Harvey Keitel and he started spinning his ring and he goes, the Freemasons thought that the treasure of the Templars was too powerful for one man, or something like that. And that was it. When I saw that, I said, if this is really, I know two examples of people that are humble like that and really are doing the right things, even when people aren't watching, and even if there's not super high accolades. I want to be a part of that. And I petitioned Rochester Lodge 21 extremely shortly thereafter. And it's been a wonderful journey meeting people from all walks of life. I did a lot of things fairly traditional. I went through the Scottish Rite before Shrine. I've enjoyed my time in the Shrine, and indeed, my youngest daughter benefited from the Shriners Hospital. So there's a lot of stories, and again, I don't think a lot of things happen by chance and the universe winks at us. And so I was meant to find this, and even though I didn't know that my grandfather was a member of Masonic Lodge before he passed away, I definitely knew he was a Mason.
Even though my dad wasn't a Mason, I mean, he definitely was about ritual and connections and that sort of thing. And he died before I became a Mason. But yeah, there's that line in Desiderata that, like, whether or not it's clear to you, like, you are exactly, you're where you're supposed to be, and the universe is unfolding as it should. As I get older, I firmly believe that whatever power and influence I thought in my 20s, I don't know. I spend more of my days in wonder than I do uh, feeling certain about many things. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think too many people have false belief that they understand the world and they've seen it all, even as they get older. And as I've gotten older, I've realized if you just look for it, there are beautiful things that are around you every day.
Small things. Like, that's the thing that maybe that's where I think you and I are even more similar is, yeah, the big trips, the big vacations, they're great, but man, I would love to, yeah, it'd be great to go on a big trip with my dad and my mom, whatever. But some things I really just love is that, man, I would love it if I could just play cribbage with my dad one more time, or with my wife and my daughter. Yeah, it'd be great to go and do a big trip to DC, but I really love just kind of going and running errands with them on a Saturday. Like, that's the good stuff.
That's actually one of the things that draws me into motorcycles is you get to go down these other paths that you may not have ever thought about going down and stumble across, the mom and pop shop to have a nice cheeseburger or something like that. And maybe it's a bookstore that you've never visited and stop and just take in the air and look at the river and have a nice cup of coffee. And you're doing it often, you can do it alone, but oftentimes I enjoy it with the company of brothers. And that's the other thing since I've become a Mason is just taking the time to sit like in our club room and getting to know the histories of where people have been. I do like history, but even more than that, I love the stories of the people that are around me. And, as an example, I have a dear friend who claims that his grandmother invented the fish sandwich. You don't hear that every day. And so even if it's not exactly true, it's still a fun story.
One of the things that whenever I do education, like, is I minutes are great, and yeah, it's wonderful that we write books about, certain Masons. But I wish that we would talk more about the Masons who, like, they're never going to write a book about, or they're never going to put a statue to. Not those guys who stood up, whether they got the spotlight or not. You know, and the Masonry is riddled with those stories. That's the one that Brent Morris was talking about at MCME, right? The church that um, wanted a cornerstone laid, and the brethren somehow got it together and very quietly, paid off the rest of the building of the church. And not even that big, but I needed help building a chicken coop, and a couple of brethren saw it on Facebook and showed up. I mean, I don't know, those are the stories that should be told.
I smell a collaboration. So I actually started to collect some of these stories, as you may have guessed, based on the fish story, and there's some others as well. And it really came from inspiration from another brother, Aaron Sims, who was telling me I was reading over, the bio of one of these guys we have to give a funeral and started talking about all these wonderful things he did. And he goes, isn't it a shame that we never sat down and talked with him? Now, there are plenty of other guys that certainly we have. But to your point, how awesome would it be if we did a call to action and at least one brother in every state started collecting stories like that and we compiled them into a book?
That's the good stuff. I mean, that's, there's only so many books you can write about George Washington or, Marquis de Lafayette, but, you know, writing books about my buddy Brad Maxwell, writing, about, hell, name half the guys that are our friends that, toil in, they're never gonna get the spotlight or a statue, but the world doesn't run without them, and they just do some amazing things. So were
The
you the
harsh
slave?
truth is a lot of the people I know, it goes back to what I said with Harvey Keitel. They're humble. Many of them deserve it because I see, even though a lot of others don't, and maybe the world doesn't, I see what they're doing. And it would be nice for that perspective, just even if they didn't get real names, just to say, you know what, you've made a difference in this world. It actually goes very in alignment with our current Grand Master's theme. Everything you do is important, and man, the truer words I don't think have been spoken.
In my 20s, I definitely wanted the spotlight. I wanted to be like the star. And I don't know whether it's age or masonry that has gotten me to the point that I am comfortable enough that I don't need to take score of who the smartest guy in the room is, or I don't need that recognition like I used to in my 20s.
I think it's probably a mixture of things. I gave a talk at work today talking about the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and posed that wisdom takes time. That's the age component. I definitely bear with me on this next part. I
You're
think
good.
there's a difference that is overlooked between management and leadership. To be a good manager, you have to be a good leader, but in order to be a leader, you don't necessarily need to be a manager. And it's about taking care of those people that are in your charge. And Masonry at its core really teaches that. I think it kind of goes over people's heads, but it's more than trying to make good men into better men. Um, it's really training Masons the fundamentals of leadership. And Canton, you may remember that, and you saw in Minnesota, my 7 Habits of Highly Effective Masons. Um, that was really inspired because one day I thought, man, the teachings of Covey really mimic a lot of the lessons and the frameworks that we teach in Masonry. He takes an inside out approach, and at the end talks about continual improvement. And I did a little bit of research and found out that he did some looking into different types of self-improvement, and found this one type after World War II that was all about self-image and how people view yourselves, and it wasn't nearly as powerful as what was being done prior to World War II, which was all about principles and principle-based leadership. And a huge part of his inspiration for discussing this was Benjamin Franklin. So, great truths show up in multiple ways, and I wish we would take pause of it and reflect on that, and realize that yes, Masonry does make us better, and because of that, and the attributes it inspires in us, if we really take it to heart and live by the philosophy, then it's going to naturally turn us into leaders.
It's interesting you think you say that. Yeah, because there's that age-old question of whether leaders are born or made. And I'm sure we could. The argument there is that whether it's a certain type of person who is drawn to masonry, who just normally has those qualities of being able to know their role and be supportive and be, that type of leader, or whether, you could take somebody who is me at 21 and, wanting to fight with management once a week just so they remember my name, and whether you could actually help that guy, turn him into a leader.
My belief is that we all have the potential for it. There's many different ways we can achieve it. And the secret is finding that person or persons that resonate and lift each other up. And so one of the mistakes I think the lodges make is you just throw a guy in to a circle and call them the mentor. Maybe they're working on ritual, which is great. I mean, we should all have the foundations of understanding the ritual in order to have conversations, but it's not the only thing. And naturally, those people should find each other, and if they don't, the person coming in is probably not going to stay around. My group that I met, and it's just lucky. I had one of them that was working with me on coaching proficiency. We would go through proficiency, and then we'd make breakfast and break out a deck of Munchkin. And
you've heard me say 1,000 times, right? Why the guys join? They're looking to connect. And why do they stay? Because they've made that connection. And why do they leave? Because the connection either wasn't forged or died away.
They oftentimes don't get celebrated, but the heroes that I know are around me for sure. And there's a reason why I align with them, and they have embraced Masonry as a philosophy and are passionate about teaching it to other people, and realizing that cable toes are not convenience. It is within the bounds of our abilities. And I love being around that. I have so many stories like that, Chad.
What affects one part of the body affects the entire body. And that's just what you do. I don't know how we teach that to people. Like, that's what boggles my mind from education is I don't know how we get people to care, to realize that. Anyway.
I think part of that equation is to get people talking, and certainly going remote and COVID didn't do us any favors as humanity. And I'm an oddball that kind of like, okay, sometimes it makes sense, but I think we should still be co-located in order to collaborate, because wonderful things happen. It's just how humans are wired. And I know from experience, even before this happened, because before coming to my current employment in 2007, I worked for a company that I'm very thankful for. I learned a lot, but I worked remote for, at that time, 4 out of 5 days, because the company was in La Crosse and I was in Rochester. I did the commute every day for a year. And I was going to come back to Rochester, and they said, well, go remote and stay. And I took them up on it. And, it would be absolutely, at that time, impossible if I wouldn't have gone in for design meetings once a week. Could probably get away with it now with the tools that are out there. But I remember when I came to where I work now, I literally wanted to drop on my knees and kiss the ground, because I was around people again, and you can observe, which is so important to observe and read language on how things are received. You just, for whatever reason, you can't get it when you're remote, in my opinion. And there's just more energy, excitement, and inspiration. And so what I would tell you is, I think people know it. They just have forgotten. And if we started engaging in dialogues, we would get beyond some misunderstandings. And the ideas that we come up with together with those different perspectives are far better than anything here I would come up with alone. And if we just had the ability to return back to assuming the best, having civil conversations without letting our emotions overtake us, and truly get to the root cause, maybe ask more questions than making assertions, the world would just be a truly better place. And I'll go back to Masonry and say, if Masonry isn't the cure to teaching those abilities, what is?
Well, it has to be modeled, but you're right, like that is the benefit, not, that's one of the many benefits of Masonic Lodge, right? That you can go there and, you know, politics, religion, background, you know, whatever. That in theory, you can start from a place of respect and say, like, listen, I'm so sorry, you know, I know nothing about, you know, an Ibrith. Could you please, like, or the Baha'i faith, could you please just sort of tell me, help me understand? I just don't know anything. And hopefully the brother would be respectful enough to be like, yeah, here's what we do, here's how this works. You know, you and I are very similar in many respects in the way that we think and, you know, our experiences. Um, it seems to me, and I'm going to be kind of crabby about Grand Lodges here for a second. Grand Lodges seem to want to put education in a particular box, right? Grand Lodges all that education is all about leadership. Education is all about mechanics. Now they obviously are trying to making it all about membership, but it's membership initiatives, not necessarily membership retention. You know, and what you and I are talking about right now, I mean, it is Masonic education, but it's not. It feels like it's not something you can do in a 5-minute presentation at the during a lodge meeting, or it's not. I don't know what we're talking about doesn't feel like it jives with what Grand Lodge wants out of education. Does that make sense, or does it you agree with that or no?
I think I know where you're coming from, but I guess I've been really supported by my Grand Lodge, uh, and have gotten a lot of accolades from the officers behind the scenes based on the articles that I've published. That's not to say I don't have my critics, but there's a guy, do you know who Randy Pausch is? Who
Mhm.
wrote a book called The Last Lecture? There's something that really stood out that he said once in that book and in his videos. Our critics are the ones that remind us that they haven't lost hope. It's when they fall silent that we should be afraid. And I try to remember that because it's not always easy to be around critics. And here's what I think. People are very opinionated. Not everybody. Many people are very opinionated, even in the craft, about what Masonic education is. And ever since I was a kid, people, said, my goodness, you have so many interests. How do you do it? And it's really about time management and rotating through them. We live in the Midwest. We have different seasons. I'm not riding motorcycle in the winter. I do some radio. I do riding. So and I was my both my grandma and grandpa, much to my chagrin in some ways, pushed a lot of arts along with the sciences. I was drugged to the symphony and to plays, and I just grew to appreciate a lot of things. And looking back, I appreciate it a whole lot more now than I did back then. And just learning, I didn't learn until school in college that I liked to write, and it just took the right person to inspire it. And so where I'm going with all of this is my belief is anything is fair game. People should be interested in the world that's around them. It's not the sole thing, and I spend a whole lot of my time reflecting on the fact that I'm living a very temporary physical existence when who I really am is much, much larger. And one of my favorite topics to discuss is reflecting on that with the philosophers that are around me that are interested in engaging in some of those reflections. But one of the educators in Minnesota said it really well. It's really about applied masonry and taking a specific topic. Maybe it's AI, maybe it's how we interact with the community. Maybe it could even be the nobody wants to hear about pancakes, but if you talk about pancake breakfast and find a new way to present it that's interesting and reflects on Masonic ideals or traits, it's all about how it's presented, in my opinion. And
Well,
another
and
thing I really owe my grandpa is he taught me a long time ago, even on topics I wasn't interested in, to change the way I was thinking and find ways to find it interesting. And it's one of the greatest gifts he gave me.
there's certain qualities that you have, right? You are humble, you are curious, you are grateful, um, you consume knowledge and you also produce knowledge. But that there's a journey to getting there. And
Okay.
one of the hard parts about Masonic education is how do you take somebody who was just raised on Thursday and how do you get him to where you are? Or where
Got
I
it.
may like part of it is getting them out of their shell. Part of it, I guess, also is like the difference between education and, full of facts. And I don't know yeah, how do we get somebody to get to where you are?
So you have to capitalize on the people that are curious. Um, I became the sum total of who I am because I stand on giants,
Mhm.
truly. Uh, I used to be a lot more shy, especially in front of a large amount of people. And I found Guy Kawasaki, who was a designer from Apple, has a great talk called The Art of Innovation. I've borrowed some of his tactics, including putting numbers at the bottom of my slides so people, if they're bored with what I'm talking about, they know about how long they'll be bored. So they say borrowing is the thing that we should do in order to flatter the people that impress us. So definitely Guy Kawasaki is one of the more awesome speakers I've ever seen. So if you haven't checked him out on YouTube, you should. He's awesome. TED Talks out there.
Mhm.
Simon Sinek is another
Yeah.
one I absolutely love. I've been watching him for a long time, especially as I've been trying to learn how to better help the people around me and inspire them. Inspiration is a big component of this too. And it doesn't have to be anything with huge fanfare. It has more to do with how we act. Masonry over time, I think, will install that even more in the people that stick around. It's just inherent. I mean, again, the stories that I have, including the Duratio story, where people absolutely inspired me. And you'll notice it wasn't about what they talked about or what they simply said. It was about what they did. And seeing that demonstration and being inspired, knowing that um, I was in a place where it was completely acceptable to ask questions and not having grumpy people at the sidelines that are rolling eyes or sighing or whatever when that was going on helps solidify it. So we should all be aware of the messages we're sending, either in the way we respond to somebody or um, the way our body language conveys our mood, and being willing to say when we're wrong or apologize. I got these values from my mom and dad and my grandma and grandpa, and I've tried to be there for people that have, maybe not had that same experience, and that's one of the best ways I know to honor my family. And, everything I am wants to live up to be even an ounce of who that person was, transferring that hope, in a very hopeless situation to another person who really needed it. Uh, that to me is super inspiring, and we should all try to bring some of that light to other people, because it's definite. Life's not easy, and I would tell you it's by design. I believe the whole point is to learn, and you know, there's no reason why we can't and shouldn't help people through that adventure. I think That's part of it too.